Sekeres Price from Wall Center, presentation of Jaguar Land Rover Vancouver. Check out GoGoatSports.com and our merch store where you can get some S&P swag. And in a moment, one of our Go Goat Sports colleagues here on the podcast side.
That's right. Darren Dreger just seconds away. But first, I want to tell you about Zuckerman Law Group. If you're going through a separation or a divorce, folks, you need the peace and tranquility or relative therein of knowing that you've got the right people on your side for a fast and fair resolution. And those people are the Zuckerman Law Group. Over 100 years of combined courtroom experience, but the know-how to avoid adding to that and costly litigation by using mediation, collaboration, arbitration to get to that fast and fair resolution even quicker. Do yourself a favor. Go to the website, zuckermanlaw.ca, see all the info there, and then make sure you book your no-obligation, completely confidential consultation at zuckermanlaw.ca.
Joining us now, TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast, is Mr. Darren Dreger, our Wednesday regular. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
Very well. The TSN Trade Bait Board, and just less than 3 weeks now away from the NHL trade deadline, we have noticed that JT Miller has slid below Conor Garland and Brock Besser on the latest incarnation. And just so everyone knows, Darren does not rank the Trade Bait Board. He only submits what he knows, but go ahead and do the interpretation.
It's a very scientific algorithm.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. They take in all the big data, the analytics, but maybe do the interpretation for us, my friend, on why Garland and Besser are ahead of JT Miller.
Well, it's based on what the needs are of the Vancouver Canucks. Now, if you're basing it solely on interest level, well, then JT Miller should be ahead of those two players, right? Because, the market is strong. It's been strong on JT Miller for quite a while. I think the New York Rangers, I think the Colorado Avalanche, to some degree, the Minnesota Wild, although my many sources tell me that there isn't a fit there with Vancouver. You've got Besser and the contract. So, that is number one and pretty obvious. And in Conor Garland, I don't think that there's a rush to move him because you can see that he's a quality piece. But I don't know that the Vancouver Canucks see him as long-term a fit. And there's interest in Conor Garland as well. So sometimes you just swap pieces. And if you can shed a little bit of payroll and create a little bit of cap space in doing that, then there's going to be interest from management standpoint in Vancouver. So I think more from an organizational perspective, Garland and Besser should be ahead of JT Miller. It may not pan out that way between now and March 21st, again, because of all the teams that want to get their hands on JT Miller. But as we've talked about before, the fact he has another year remaining on his contract, man, that's currency. And he's a producing forward for the Vancouver Canucks who want to stay competitive. They want to stay in it here, through the trade deadline to the end of the season. So for those reasons, I believe the Trade Bait Board does have Besser and Garland ahead.
On Conor Garland, he's a Boston area guy. Of course, he's a little pepper pot out there. He's noticeable even on nights where he doesn't score. And as you say, not sure he's a long-term piece for this new administration who inherited him. I mean, It's almost too straight a line, but would the Bruins be interested in that guy? He's a local guy. Bring home a guy who can score and, serve in that middle six. And particularly if they're peddling Jake DeBrusk, who we've heard about in trade rumors for years now.
Yeah, look, I think there's good reason to believe the Boston Bruins would have interest in Conor Garland. We know that they've been looking for a forward for quite some time now. Whether or not there's a swap fit there, that would send Jake DeBrusk to the Vancouver Canucks for Conor Garland, I don't know. I mean, I've heard the interest from Boston's standpoint, and then I bounced that off of my Vancouver sources, and it doesn't seem to be as connective as what Boston is maybe hoping it is. Again, we're still so early, and there's a long stretch between now and March 21st. So maybe something develops there. But the Jake DeBrusk scenario is an interesting one. He's coming off the hat trick game. He's got a bigger role in the lineup with Bruce Cassidy and the Boston Bruins. So things are going right for him. But his agent on insider trading through Pierre LeBrun reported this on Tuesday. He basically doubled or tripled down and saying, Jake still wants to change the scenery. He's standing firm on his trade request. So I think that's going to elevate things a little bit. I doubt it would ever get as simple as DeBrusque for Garland, but if there is reciprocated interest between those two clubs, maybe you get creative and you include another team that is maybe willing to take on some cap space or has another interesting piece that makes it more dynamic in a three-way scenario.
And DeBrusque's agent even has permission to talk contract extension with acquiring teams, which is a pretty big canary in the mine shaft, right? When you're talking about guys who could be traded. Blake.
Mark Giordano is actually old, and he actually feels older than that because he really didn't have a notable season till he was 27 years of age in the National Hockey League. But I mean, he is 38 right now. He'll be 39 in training camp. But if he comes back at all, and you're signing a UFA, so like everybody knows what they're getting into, and it may be his last kick at the can. But what kind of value does Mark Giordano have for Ron Francis, who is no longer mincing words? He is going to try everything in his power to trade Mark Giordano.
Yeah, I mean, reportedly, Francis wants at least a first-round pick for Mark Giordano. Is that too much? It could be. I think of the teams that are looking for a defenseman. The Toronto Maple Leafs have basically said that they don't want to blow out another first-round pick on any player, especially a rental. So does that take them out of the mix? Well, let's see how their goaltending settles in. And if it doesn't, maybe Kyle Dubas doesn't have a choice. And then you look at some of the other teams that are in the market. I think Calgary very much would like to add a defenseman. We know that Brad Treliving was trying to get Ben Sherratt out of Montreal as part of the Toffoli deal and couldn't. Is it conceivable they bring Mark Giordano back there? Feels like a stretch to me because he's such a big presence in Calgary. So if you bring him back and he can't play at the level that you need him to play, how much of a hindrance does that then become? Because again, the market sees Mark Giordano as he was when he was plucked by the Seattle Kraken as part of their expansion draft. But you don't know until you throw it out there, and so Ron Francis has made it clear that he is open for business. If teams need to create cap space, well, for a sweetener, he'll find a way to help that team create that cap space. And he talked about Mark Giordano openly, and he basically says he's trading him. And he would like a first-round pick. So it might be tough, and I would say that about Ben Sherratt, maybe some of the other defensemen that are on the market aside from the top-tier guys, because teams have learned lessons over time, and giving up a first-round pick for a pending unrestricted free agent plus is a challenge for a lot of these clubs now because they've done it. They've tried it the last few years, and it hasn't really helped them.
Toffoli's done well since arriving in Calgary, and to me, that's a good advertisement for teams to make trades and remind them the benefit of doing so. But I just get the feeling after all these years of flat cap, and there's been some activity at trade deadlines. I thought last year would be crickets, and I mean it was on the relative scale crickets, but there were still trades made. Is it possible this is the year where it's been too many years of flat cap and we see almost nothing, or do you think that eventually when we get there it'll happen?
Yeah, I do, because you've got teams that have windows closing, right, as top contenders. We talked about the Boston Bruins. I don't know if they're a top contender, but they're in that discussion among the Eastern teams. Julian Breezeball and the Tampa Bay Lightning are trying to win 3 consecutive Stanley Cups. I believe Julian Breezeball is going to do something. How significant? Don't know, but normally when the Tampa Bay Lightning add a piece, it ends up turning out to be a piece that helps them win a Stanley Cup. Florida, I think, is still trying to match what is going on in Tampa Bay. So I think Billy Zito is going to add. We talked a little bit about the Leafs. If they don't get a defenseman, they're going to try and add a forward. Colorado, speculation around the Avalanche has been basically from day one of the season to this point. So where Joe Sakic's mind is at in terms of what his needs are, it's hard to say, but it sure feels like he is going to add something. And the Claude Giroux rumors seem to be persistent, not going away. I mean, it's up to Claude Giroux if he's going to waive and how many teams he's willing to waive to. And Minnesota and Billy Guerin, that's a team of interest to me, guys, because until very recently, he was willing to stand pat. He liked his group, thought they were playing well, didn't feel like it was worth trying to add a piece potentially to disrupt chemistry. Well, they're in a bit of a funk right now, and if that continues, then I could see Minnesota also getting active. So I guess what I'm saying here, Blake, is there are enough teams that the market could be driven by that. It very well could. What we hope for in the business of breaking trades is that it doesn't happen a week or 2 weeks outside of the deadline. So, for the next handful of days here, that's the window that we're working on. But I think that's, hey, I had a conversation with Chuck Fletcher of the Philadelphia Flyers yesterday, and he's still not sure what direction he's going. And I think that's a big part of what can influence or impact the market. Until you truly know who the sellers are and what they're willing to part with, then all those teams that I just mentioned maybe can't be as active as they want to be.
Well, the interesting part, I'll say this, though. It's getting interesting in the Pacific with what we have noted with the Vancouver Canucks and a new administration. What we just talked about with Seattle and, not just Giordano and the fact that obviously they're sellers and with some pieces to sell, but they can take on money too, Dregs, which there's not a lot of teams that can take on money, right? Be a parking spot for bad money. And then you have Anaheim where Pat Verbeek has said to the three UFAs, Lindholm, Raquel, and Manson, if we don't get you signed by the deadline, I'm moving you. So, to Blake's point about where's the activity going to be in the trade deadline, it may very well be in the Pacific Division with the Canucks and these two rivals.
Yeah, it absolutely could be. And then I know what Pat Verbeek is doing, and he's stealing a page from the history books. This is the position that general managers used to take with their pending unrestricted free agents. Like, we cannot let you walk for free. So you either, come to terms here or we're going to trade you. And it's going to disrupt your family or whatever. That used to be kind of the 11th hour talk of GMs, especially the experienced ones. I think I'd be okay taking that position with Rickard Rakell and Josh Manson. I'm not taking that position with Hampus Lindholm. I'm just not. And from Lindholm's standpoint, why would he rush into signing with the Anaheim Ducks? Unless he absolutely loves living there, which I think we can all respect and appreciate that. He likes the idea of where the Anaheim Ducks are trending towards, but they're not there yet. And they're probably a year or two away. But he's also earned the right to see what the market looks like, right? And the market for Hampus Lindholm as an unrestricted free agent would be terrific. Would be terrific. He will get paid a lot of money. I don't know where the negotiation is at. I know that they've had dialogue, and I'm sure that Verbeek and company have done their homework and they know, or have a good feel for where it's going to get to. But to say that you're trading him before March 21st, if you don't have a deal signed or you don't feel comfortable that a deal is going to sign, I don't know if I'm buying it yet. He's a pretty good piece.
There's been an unprecedented reaction from the sporting world to what's happened in Ukraine. We've seen some moving starts to games already in the National Hockey League, but perhaps the most intriguing one for me has been the treatment of Alexander Ovechkin, who has the biggest, most obvious link to the invasion because of hey, what still remains his darn profile pic on Instagram with Vladimir Putin. But for the equipment manufacturer to step away, for other sponsors to step away and say, we're not using Alexander Ovechkin's visage right now. To me, it blows me away that the Caps and the NHL have not weighed in, even privately, Dregs. Do you know of any attempt privately to lean on Ovechkin and say, can you take the damn photo down at the very minimum? Yeah. Why is that thing still up?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because now you're really delving into an individual's personal beliefs and what they're about. And it's distasteful to all of us that there is a profile picture of Alex Ovechkin on his Instagram page with him and Vladimir Putin. It's been there for a long, long time. Angers many. It does. And in fact, it hasn't been dropped yet, but on the Ray and Dregs hockey podcast this week, and I don't know if it comes out tonight or tomorrow morning, Gord Miller joined us because as you guys follow Gord Miller on Twitter, as do I, he's well connected with the international community and has friends in Ukraine. And so one of the topics that we discussed, and I asked both Ray and Gord, is, will Ovechkin's legacy be tarnished because of his history with Putin, and in the moment, the fact that he is not clearly disconnecting. I mean, he said what he said in his media availability, and I don't know that we should expect a professional athlete to say more than he did. I guess you always hope, right? You hope that the humanity of it takes precedent, or becomes your priority. But I'm not going to second guess what Ovechkin said or what he didn't say. But there's a risk in this of Ovechkin's legacy being deeply tainted. Maybe not from a hockey player standpoint. I mean, the stats are what they are, and he's probably not done as an NHL player anytime soon. But where do we disconnect between the superstar that he has been as an NHL player for the Washington Capitals and the fact that he has historically been aligned with Vladimir Putin and clearly has no problem still being aligned, at least optically, with Vladimir Putin during war times when people are dying? It's a really tough one, and then not so tough for me, and probably for you guys and many others. But for the National Hockey League or the Players Association to step in and say, you've got to take that profile pick down, I guess. But if you start that, where does it end? Because many players, we read a story on Paul Stastny, donating to the trucker convoy, right? I mean, when we start diving into the corners of people's personal lives, be it our own or professional athletes, that gets a little dicey for me.
I appreciate slippery slope. Where does it end? Maybe at Avatar Pictures with Vladimir Putin. Maybe that's where we draw the line. But
maybe.
Maybe. And I know Alex Ovechkin isn't a client of Dan Milstein, the NHL player agent, who I saw you quoted earlier in the week, Darren, saying, look, I represent Russian guys, and I'm a little bit worried about threats here, and I'm hoping for greater security for these players. I mean, Ovechkin doesn't seem to care, right? Like if you've got an avatar with Vladimir Putin. But, Wes had story today on tsn.ca, and we've kicked this around the last couple of days, Blake. Now, we now have the Ukrainian embassy in Ottawa asking the government to say, hey, step in and tell the National Hockey League, like, we do not want Russian athletes permitted here in Canada. Don't let them play. Is the NHL and the PA, like, are they prepared for some difficult questions that could come here from the Canadian government, U.S. State Department, about allowing Russian NHL players to continue on playing when it seems like the rest of the world and other sports bodies are doing their utmost to isolate Putin and freeze out his athletes from competing?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that the National Hockey League and the PA would push back if there were only questions. One of them being, why aren't you suspending these players? They'd push back because these players are under contract, regardless of what's going on in the world in war times. But where the government could absolutely trump the National Hockey League and the Players Association is by yanking visas, right? And just federal governments, U.S. and Canada, saying as long as this war is ongoing and as long as Russia continues to position itself the way it is against Ukraine, then we are suspending work visas. But can you do it? You can't just do it with pro athletes. You've got to do it across the board. You've got to do it against corporations and major industry, et cetera. And does it stop only with the Russians? If the government's decided to do that federally, the NHL would have no choice, zero choice. No different than, the dance with all of the restrictions of the pandemic, right? I mean, there isn't a building in the National Hockey League, certainly in Canada, that wanted to reduce capacity. Maybe they were okay to do the right thing, society speaking, and drop it to 50%. But to go virtually empty for as long as they did, I could tell you there's some Canadian owners that weren't happy with the provincial governments, let alone the Canadian government. There's nothing they could do about it. So that's the only way the Russian players, in my opinion, are suspended or banned, is if the federal government step in.
Yep. Wonderful stuff, Darren. Thank you for the time here today. Appreciate this. We'll be listening to Ray and Dregs with Gord Miller. You're quite right. I mean, Gord knows people in every hockey federation the world over, I think. And boy, has the IIHF made news this week with its new president, Renee Fassel, criticizing the new president. And so is our old friend Simon Schemberg, their director of PR, criticizing Fassel. Boy, it's a messy house right now with the IIHF. Thanks for this. Until next Wednesday, Dregs.
All right, guys. Have a good week.
Be well.
Darren Dreger, our hockey insider, our mortgage insider, on the other hand, is Jason Hominick, because nobody knows more about mortgages than Mortgages by Jason. You can find him at jason.mortgage. It's as simple as that. And he'd love to talk to you about your mortgage. And maybe you think, no, my mortgage is good. Is it, though? Because if it's more than 3%, you should be calling Jason Hominick, and he'll be the one that answers the phone and talks to you all about it. He's in your corner. The big banks are not. And the banks, well, they're going to be maneuvering soon. He doesn't work for them. He works for you. Don't boost their billion-dollar profits. Boost your own. So have him take a look at your current mortgage situation and let him advise you. And hey, if you're one of the few percent that is in a perfectly amazing mortgage and is exactly where it's supposed to be, then great, he'll tell you that. But if he's got tips to save you money, don't you want to hear it? Jason.mortgage to book a complimentary review of your current mortgage and see how much he can save you. It's Jason.mortgage.